A man was about to cremate his wife, but his 6-year-old son arrived, saying he heard his mother calling him. What happened next left everyone in shock. The light of day was still faint when David opened his eyes. He didn't know if he had fallen asleep or just passed out from exhaustion. The chair he was sitting in hurt his back, but he didn't even move. He just wanted to stay there with her hand in his. Grace was lying there, so still, so pale. Cables and tubes surrounded her body, like the roots of a tree that no longer breathed. The monitor next to the bed was silent, showing only a straight line, steady, as if to say, "It's over." David rested his forehead on her hand. It was cold, cold in a way that hurt him to the bone. "Grace," he whispered, his voice breaking. "My love, please." But she didn't respond. Not even a sign, not even a tremor in her fingers. Her face looked like wax, her lips parted, her eyes closed as if she were sleeping very deeply. The door opened slowly. A doctor entered, accompanied by a nurse. Both had that look on their faces that said it all, even before they spoke. "Mr. David," the doctor began in a low voice. "We did everything we could." Her heart stopped at 4:17 this morning. The team tried to revive her for almost 20 minutes, but she passed away. He listened, but he didn't understand. He left. How could she be gone? She was there, right in front of him. She was still there. Her scent lingered on the pillow. Her ring was still on her finger. David didn't say anything. He just shook his head slowly, as if to say no, but at the same time he already knew. A sound came out of his throat, something between a sob and a muffled cry. The nurse approached with a sweet but tired look. She touched his shoulder. "If you need more time, we can wait. We understand. But how long does it take for that to heal?" He just wanted to go back a few hours, back before the hospital, before the pain, before the news. He wanted to go back to when Grace laughed loudly in the kitchen, with her apron covered in flour, calling him to try her bread, or when the two of them danced slowly in the living room with Ethan asleep on the couch. Now that was gone. David brought his hand to his face and cried. He cried silently, unable to breathe properly. His chest hurt. The world felt frozen. He got up slowly, as if every muscle in his body weighed a ton. He leaned over Grace and kissed her on the forehead. "I love you," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "And I will love you forever." His eyes were red, his hands trembling. When he left the room, he didn't know how to take the next step. He only knew that the woman of his life was no longer there. He leaned over slowly. He was afraid of ruining the moment, of making everything too real. He placed his lips on her forehead, which was so cold. It wasn't just the coldness of her skin, it was the coldness of her absence. "Wait for me," he whispered hoarsely. "Even if it takes me a lifetime, but wait for me." He stayed there a little longer, trying to memorize her scent, the shape of her eyelashes, every little bit of that face he loved. He didn't want to forget anything, nothing. The nurse knocked on the door gently with her eyes downcast. She was carrying a small board with papers in her hands. "Mr. David, we need your signature for the cremation paperwork." He didn't answer, just reached out, grabbed the pen as if it were a weapon, and looked at the papers. His name, her name, the date, time, crematorium, everything there, cold, printed, as if it were just another piece of paper. His hand was shaking. The letters came out crooked. The pen felt like it weighed a ton. He signed the last line, and there, at that moment, it was as if he had truly said goodbye to God. The tears fell silently. They slid down his face like a light rain. No one said anything, nor was it necessary. Pain filled the air. When the nurse picked up the papers, David sat down in the chair again. He held her hand one more time, just a little longer, just a moment longer. He wanted time to stop, for someone to knock on the door and say it was all a mistake, that she was going to wake up, that it was just a nightmare. But no, it was real, and the world was now a darker, emptier place. The front door creaked softly as David entered. The sound sounded strange in the silence, as if the whole house had been holding its breath. He closed the door carefully, dropped the keys on the hallway table, and stood there, not knowing what to do. The smell of the house was the same, a mixture of stale coffee, children's shampoo, and a hint of cornstarch cookies. But now that smell wasn't comforting, it was sad. Grace's coat was still hanging up, and her crooked slipper was next to the door. That made his chest tighten. It was as if she were still there, and at the same time, so far away. David walked slowly to his son's room. The door was ajar, the light was off, and there was a silence that didn't fit with a 6-year-old years old. He pushed the door open. The room was exactly as Grace had left it. The blue toy car in the corner, a half-finished drawing on the desk, a tiny shoe on the floor, turned upside down, the blanket on the bed in disarray, as if someone had just run out of there. But there was no one there. David looked around, his heart beginning to beat faster. Ethan called in a quiet voice. Silence. "Son, it's me, Dad." Nothing. He went to the bathroom. Nothing. He opened the closet, the laundry room, even looked under the bed. Nothing, Ethan. Now the cry came out louder. Desperate, he ran to the kitchen. The back door was locked, but the kitchen window was ajar. A cold wind was coming in, gently moving the curtain. David's heart froze. No, no, no. He grabbed his cell phone with trembling hands. He called the neighbor across the street, then the one next, then his friend, who lived on the street behind him. "Have you seen Ethan? He was there. He talked to you." But no one knew anything. "Oh, I thought he was with you," said a surprised neighbor. David began to walk in circles in the living room, pulling his hair, shaking. Ethan. My God. Ethan. He felt as if the floor had disappeared, as if the whole world was falling beneath his feet. He had already lost the woman of his life, and now his son was missing. In the middle of the living room, everything seemed frozen in time. The TV was off. The light in the hallway was still on from the night before, and a half-empty cup of milk sat on the table. David looked at it all as if he were a stranger in his own home. That's when he saw the piece of paper on the table. A crumpled piece of paper with the corners folded, covered in crayon marks. He approached slowly, as if he already knew it was going to hurt. He picked up the paper carefully. It was a drawing, a red heart in the center of the page, and next to it, 2 figures. A woman with wings up above, surrounded by clouds and little yellow stars. It was Grace. He could tell by her brown hair and big eyes. Below, there was a colorful staircase, and a boy in a green t-shirt climbing step by step. Ethan, with his little arms stretched up, trying to reach his mom. David felt his legs give way. He sat down on the couch as if he had been hit. He turned the paper over and saw shaky letters that only a 6-year-old could write. It said, "I'm going to find Mom." The world seemed to stop. He read it again, once, twice, 3 times. Each word hurt more. "I'm going to find Mom." David clutched the paper to his chest and began to cry. A dry, choked, desperate cry, as if someone had sucked the air out of him. Ethan. No, my God. Son. He imagined the little boy putting on his sneakers, grabbing his backpack, opening the window, leaving alone in the early morning, believing he could find his mother and climb up to the sky. "What did you do, my son? What did you do?" David's heart was beating so hard, it felt like it was going to explode. His whole body was shaking. The paper was still in his hands, now wet with tears. That was the sign. That drawing was the only clue, the only thing his son had left behind before disappearing. The rain started lightly, almost like a drizzle, but it seemed to cut into David's face like needles. He ran out of the house without a coat, the drawing still in his hand, wrinkled and wet. The streets of Maplewood were empty. Only a few neighbors stood under their porches, looking strangely at this wet man, shouting desperately. "Ethan!" he shouted, his chest. "Ethan, answer me, please." The raindrops fell on the asphalt, mixing with the tears that ran down his face without stopping. He looked around every corner, searching inside cars, on the sidewalks, near the park, but there was nothing. The silence was more than he could bear. "Tate, it's me. Dad, where are you, son?" Some people began to look out their windows. A woman on the upper floor opened her curtains and stood staring without saying a word. Another woman at the door crossed her arms and looked sadly. "David, are you all right?" He didn't answer. He ran past her, like a ghost. The water was already soaking his hair, running down his neck, his wet clothes clinging to his body. But he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. What if Ethan had fallen? What if he had gone somewhere dangerous? And if not, he didn't want to think about that. At the corner of the bakery, she stopped suddenly. She saw someone she knew. Doña Rosa, her neighbor across the street, was holding an umbrella and returning from the market with bags in her hands. Doña Rosa ran toward her. "Did you see Ethan? He left the house, left a drawing, and went to look for his mom." The woman opened her eyes wide. "Oh my God, I can't believe it." She dropped the bags on the floor. "David, look. Now that you mention it, I heard little footsteps in the early morning. I thought it was a cat walking on the roof, but now I remember. It was on the sidewalk. Very low, like a child." David turned pale. He felt his legs buckle. He went out alone. Doña Rosa nodded her head with a look of anguish. "I should have looked out. I should have gone out. But it was early in the morning, David, and it was so dark." He put his hands to his head. Despair grew like a wave about to break. The rain was getting heavier. "My God, Ethan, where are you, son?" All of Maplewood seemed to hold its breath with him. Time, water, fear, everything mingled together. All David knew was that he had to keep looking because his son was out there, and he was alone. David entered the police station as if he had no strength left. His clothes were still wet from the rain. His hair stuck to his forehead, his face, he held the drawing tightly, as if it were a piece of his son. His eyes were red, sunken, filled with fear. He went straight to the counter. "Please, my son is missing," he said, almost without a voice. "He's 6 years old. His name is Ethan. He left home alone in the early morning." The police officer behind the desk looked at him strangely. Then he stood up, noticing how David was. "Calm down, sir. Let's talk. Explain everything to me, please." David was shaking. He could hardly breathe. "Look at this." He held out the drawing with trembling hands. This is what he left. A heart, a staircase, and he wrote that he was going to look for his mom. He understood everything wrong. His mom died early this morning. The hospital called me at 4 a.m. I rushed over there. I thought I would be back before he woke up. It was 2 hours at most. He paused for a moment and swallowed his tears. When I got back, he was gone. He left the drawing. The kitchen window was open. I looked everywhere. I ran all over Maplewood. No one saw him. No one. The police officer took the paper and looked at it carefully. Then he looked at David again. Taz was wearing sneakers, a backpack, something like that. He must have taken his blue sneakers, the ones with little lights, and his dinosaur backpack. Maybe she took them. The police officer nodded. He signaled to another officer who began typing on the computer, but his face showed concern. "Look, we're going to send out a notice to all patrols in the area." "Okay, but tell me something. You said he wanted to find his mom, right?" David nodded, still trying not to cry. Yes, that's what he drew. He thought she went up to heaven and that he could go after her." The police officer was silent for a few seconds, then looked around thoughtfully. "It may sound strange, but what if he went to the hospital?" David opened his eyes in surprise. "To the hospital? But how? A child that age sometimes remembers more than we think. Maybe he learned the way, or asked around. You never know." A glimmer of hope, however small, shone in David's eyes. "The hospital, of course. Of course, my God." He turned around without saying another word. He ran out of the police station with his heart pounding, because at that moment, all he needed was a clue, a sign, anything, because losing Grace was already too much. Losing Ethan would be the end. David arrived at the hospital with the car still running. He didn't even close the door or look to the sides. He ran out like a madman with the drawing crumpled in his hands, his heart pounding, his breath short and agitated. The automatic door opened, and he rushed in like a hurricane. "Ethan!" he shouted immediately. "Ethan!" The people at the reception desk turned around in fright. Some nurses looked at each other. One went up to him. "Sir, what's wrong? My son is 6 years old. His name is Ethan. He may have come here. Please, please." He disappeared. He left home alone early this morning. He could hardly finish his sentences. The words stuck in his throat. His eyes searched everywhere in the reception area, every chair, every face, but he didn't see his son, and that hurt even more. He ran to the main hallway. He shouted the boy's name, not caring who heard him. "Ethan! Ethan! It's me, Dad! Where are you, son? Talk to me!" 2 security guards approached him. "Sir, you can't run like that in here. What's going on? My son is missing," he replied without thinking. He could be in here somewhere. His name is Ethan. He's 6 years old, dark hair. He's wearing blue sneakers with lights on them. He drew this. He showed me the paper all wet. He wrote that he was going to look for his mom. His mom died early this morning. The guards looked at each other worriedly. One of them picked up the radio. "There's a child missing. Name, Ethan, age 6. Check all areas." Then he turned to David. "We're going to help, sir, but you need to calm down." "I can't calm down," he shouted, his eyes red. "Today I lost my wife, and now my son is missing. How do you want me to be calm?" His voice echoed through the hallways, and at that moment, it seemed like the whole world stopped just to hear the cry of a father looking for his child. David ran to the pediatric area, opened doors, moved curtains, asked everywhere, "Is Mate here?" Someone saw a little boy alone. The nurses tried to help, but nothing. No one had seen him. Then he stopped in the middle of the hallway, breathing heavily, with his hands on his knees, trying to catch the air that wouldn't come. The hospital was like him, cold, white, full of pain, and his son, lost somewhere or worse. David didn't even want to think about it. He looked up, turning around, searching, until he remembered a place no one sees, a place where he himself had knelt many times. And then he ran again, because now it was all or nothing. The doors to the chapel were ajar. The silent hallway, lit only by a yellowish light, seemed to push David toward it. His heart was beating so hard that it seemed to bounce off the walls. He took a deep breath, pushed the door open slowly, and entered. The smell of burning candles, the almost invisible sound of a wall clock. That place had always been a quiet refuge for those in need of comfort. But now, for David, it was his last hope. He took a few hesitant steps, his eyes scanning every pew, every corner, and then he saw him there in front of him, right at the feet of the image of the Virgin Grace. There was Ethan, small, curled up in a ball, with his head resting on the statue's lap. He was sleeping there, as if it were the safest place in the world. David fell to his knees at that very moment. The relief mixed with despair made his legs give way. He could hardly believe his eyes. Ethan said in a whisper, unable to hold back the tears, "My son, thank God." He crawled over to him with his heart pounding, reached out slowly, and touched the boy's shoulder carefully, as if it were made of glass. Ethan moved slowly, opened his little eyes half asleep, confused, and then recognized the voice. "Dad, it's me. Son, it's me." The boy sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes. His voice came out softly, still sleepy. "I came here because I heard Mom calling me." David swallowed hard. His chest ached with emotion. He hugged the boy tightly, his face buried in his hair. "Don't ever do that again, Ethan. Never go out alone again. You hear me? You scared me to death, son. I'm sorry, Dad. I just wanted to see Mom again." His words hurt like knives. David hugged him even tighter. "I know, son. I know. But you have me, okay? We're always together." The two of them stood there hugging in the silence of the chapel, with the candles flickering around them. A father and son, broken, lost, but together. The sound of the rain outside and far away seemed like a soft background, as if the world had stopped for a moment just to let that hug happen. "Don't ever do that again, son. You never listened to me." His voice came out trembling and broken. "You gave me the scare of my life. I thought I had lost you, too." The sound of his crying filled the empty chapel, as if each tear were a prayer. And for a moment, it seemed as if the whole sky was listening to that father and son trying to hold each other amidst the pain, trying not to sink. It was pure, raw love, without pretty words, just love that cries with you. The chapel door creaked softly. Hurried footsteps broke the silence, and David turned his tear-filled eyes toward the door. It was the doctor, flustered, his coat wrinkled and his face tired, the look of someone who has been through many shifts, but few as difficult as this one. "Mr. David, thank God," he said with relief. "We were looking for you. The guard said he saw you running through the hallways. We were worried." David let go of his son carefully, wiped his face with the back of his hand, and tried to stand up, although his body was still shaking. Ethan remained seated on the bench, hugging his knees, with a sad little face as if he knew something important was about to happen. The doctor looked David in the eyes. His voice came out lower. "Now it's time. We're going to cremate Grace now." That simple, direct sentence fell like a stone into a calm lake. The silence that followed was heavy. David closed his eyes for a second, trying to swallow that. Now the word weighed like lead. Before he could respond, another voice broke the moment. "No, Ethan!" The boy jumped up with his eyes wide open, his voice trembling. "No, Dad. Don't let them do that to Mom." David turned around immediately, knelt in front of his son, and took his little hands carefully in his own. "Ethan, listen to me, son. She called me. I heard her, Dad," he insisted, his voice breaking. "I know she's there. I felt it." The doctor was silent. He didn't know what to say. This was something that medicine couldn't explain. Only those who have lost someone and don't want to accept it can understand. David hugged his son again, closing his eyes tightly, trying to hold back the tears that were coming again. "I know, son. I know." Time seemed to stand still. Time. The boy's words continued to echo in the chapel as if searching for a place between pain and doubt. The father knew that the moment was now, that he couldn't wait any longer. But those words coming out of his son's mouth weren't just pain, they were faith, they were hope, and that made everything tremble inside. The hallway was cold, long, silent. David walked slowly, almost dragging his feet. He carried Ethan in his arms, just like when his son was just a baby. The boy's arms wrapped tightly around his father's neck, and his little face was pressed against David's chest, as if he wanted to hide from the world. There was no noise, only the sound of the air conditioning and heavy footsteps on the tile floor. Sadness filled the air like a smell. Everything there seemed to say, "The end." They stopped in front of a small glass window. On the other side, a white room, a stretcher, and on it, Grace. She was covered with a light sheet. Only her face was visible. Someone was carefully arranging her hair. Another technician checked papers, numbers, and turned on buttons. Everything was calm. Everything was a routine that was scary. David held his son tighter. Ethan didn't say anything. He just stared with wide eyes at something that such a small child shouldn't see. But there they were, the two of them, looking at the woman they loved most. For the last time, David felt a lump in his throat. He thought about how Grace smiled when she played with their son, how she sang out of tune while washing the dishes, how she danced alone in the hallway when she thought no one was watching her. Now she wasn't moving, untouchable. Ethan whispered in a low voice, "She's still pretty, Dad." David closed his eyes for a moment, swallowed, and replied in a voice that barely came out, "Yes, son, she is inside." The technician adjusted the sheet and touched the controls. The oven was ready. David rested his forehead against the glass, feeling the cold glass collide with the heat still coming from his son's body in his arms. On the other side of the glass, the technician wrote some numbers on the panel. There was a soft beep. The machine responded with a sharp click. The oven began to open. The sound of metal moving filled the room with a noise no one wanted to hear. David closed his eyes tightly. He couldn't look. He didn't want to. His chest hurt so much that it felt like it was going to explode, as if the air had been sucked out, as if the world had been swallowed by a hole that only knew how to hurt. Ethan, still in his arms, continued to stare with his eyes wide open, fixed, as if searching for something, or as if waiting. And then, very slowly, he reached out his hand and touched the cold glass with his little fingers. "Mommy," he whispered. His voice was so soft, but so full of feeling, that it sounded like a cry. David felt it like a blow to the heart. He hugged his son tighter, as if to protect him from what was about to happen, but also as if searching for the strength not to fall. The technician adjusted the stretcher, pushing it carefully, all in silence. There were no words or explanations. It was the final moment, the moment that never comes without asking permission. Ethan kept his hand on the glass. He stared at Grace as if he still believed she could hear him, as if he believed that love spoke louder. And there, in that second that seemed like an eternity, David felt a deep pain, but also a strange presence, as if something right there next to them was breathing too. But there was no sound, only that cutting, cruel, heavy silence. A silence that did not scream, but said everything. It was in a second that seemed like nothing, and at the same time everything. Ethan still had his little hand pressed against the glass. David, with his eyes closed, hugged his son as if the world were falling apart. On the other side of the glass, there was silence, but then something moved so slightly, so softly, that it could have been a reflection, or the wind, or the pain playing with their minds. But it wasn't. Grace moved her lips very slowly, as if speaking from a dream, and a word came out. Weak, almost inaudible. "Ethan." David opened his eyes wide. Time stood still. He wasn't breathing. He wasn't moving. He was just staring at it, the impossible happening right in front of him. Ethan repeated her name, the sound coming only from the shape of her mouth. "Weakly alive." "My God," he whispered, his eyes wide open. Suddenly the pain turned to surprise. The surprise turned to a scream, and he began to pound on the glass. "Stop that, please! Stop that! She's alive! She's alive!" The technician turned in fright. The stretcher was already a few steps away from the oven. He dropped the remote and ran toward Grace. David was hitting the glass, his face pressed against it, trying to see better, screaming with all the strength he had left. She spoke. My wife spoke. They couldn't continue. Ethan was also watching without understanding everything, but with his eyes shining. He had heard her. He was sure. "She called me. Dad, did you see? Did you see?" David was shaking. "I saw her, son. I saw her." Inside, the technician was already shouting for help. Nurses were rushing in. The commotion began, and David, with his hands pressed against the glass, was still repeating, almost crying, "She's alive. My love, she's alive." And in that instant, what had been the end became hope. What had been pain became a miracle. All because of a whisper, just one, but one that shouted louder than the silence of death itself. What had been silence became chaos. Suddenly the room was filled with voices, rapid footsteps, gloves being put on quickly, machines being turned on. Grace's body, which seconds before had been on its way to the oven, was now the center of a miracle in motion. 2 nurses arrived first. One put his fingers on her wrist. The other brought his stethoscope to her chest. Silence returned for a moment, but now it was a different kind of silence. A silence of tension, of waiting. David watched everything from the other side of the glass with his face pressed against it, his heart in his throat. "Please, please," he repeated, almost breathless. Ethan in his arms couldn't take his eyes off his mom, clutching his dad's shirt tightly with his little hands, breathing heavily, his eyes filled with tears. Inside, the nurses looked at each other. She has a pulse, weak, but she has one. She's breathing, barely, but she's breathing. A doctor came running in, still adjusting his glasses, his gown flying behind him. He approached, checked her signs, his eyes wide open in surprise. "It can't be," he murmured, shaking his head. "It's impossible." But there she was, alive, weak, pale, not moving, but alive. David fell to his knees on the other side of the glass, his hands on his face, crying with relief, with fear, with everything at once. Ethan climbed down from his arms, knelt beside him, and hugged him tightly. "I told you, Dad. I told you she called me." The doctor looked at the nurse and gave his orders immediately. "Take her to intensive care. Now. Hook her up again. Pressure, oxygen, everything." They moved Grace quickly, but with a care that seemed sacred, as if they knew they were touching a second chance, something no one there expected. And as the stretcher passed through the hallways, as the monitors came back on again, something became clear to everyone who saw that scene. Love made a noise, and life answered. The sound of the machines filled the room again. Beep, beep. A slow but steady rhythm. Each beep was a breath, each line on the monitor a sign that Grace was still there. The bed in the center of the ICU looked huge next to her frail body. The cables were reconnected, the oxygen carefully placed, her eyes still closed, but now, unlike before, there was life there. Weak, yes, but real, present. David was sitting next to her. He held her hand as if he were holding the whole world. That same hand he kissed silently, thinking it was the last time. Now it was warm, still motionless, but warm, and that was enough. On the other side of the bed, Ethan, standing on a small chair that the nurses had brought in, also held his mother's hand gently, his little fingers squeezing as if to say, "Stay here." No one spoke. The crying was silent. It fell from David's face uncontrollably. He tried to hold it back, but it was impossible. So many things were going through his head at that moment. The memories, the fear, the near miss. Ethan looked at his dad, with eyes full of tears. "He's going to stay." David didn't know what to say. He just looked at his son and nodded. A silent promise, a prayer disguised as a gesture. He squeezed Grace's hand tighter. "We're here. We're with you, my love." Ethan rested his head on her arm and closed his eyes as if somehow his mom was listening. And there they stayed, the three of them holding hands, father, son, and the woman they almost lost, in the cold ER, where so many endings happen. At that moment, something was beginning again, still without words, still fragile, but full of love. The monitor next to the bed continued its slow, steady rhythm. David couldn't take his eyes off Grace. Time seemed suspended, as if each second there lasted longer than the last. Ethan, still holding her hand, leaned forward in silence. His face was serious, his eyes attentive. The air was one of waiting, of quiet faith. And then, a slight movement. His eyelashes, small, almost imperceptible, but they moved. Then a slight tremor in his eyelid. David squeezed her hand. "Grace, it's me. I'm here, my love, with our son." Ethan moved closer, his eyes wide open. A tear began to roll down Grace's face, slowly, silently, wetting the white sheet. The child whispered in a soft voice, full of love, "Mommy." It sounded like a call from the soul, and little by little, as if returning from a faraway place, her eyes began to open. David stood still, unable to breathe. Grace's eyes were still blurry, at first unfocused. Then they began to see, to recognize, to understand. She turned her head slightly, looked at David, then at Ethan. Time stood still again. A small smile appeared at the corner of her mouth, weak. But then Ethan brought his hand to her face, crying softly. David let go. He cried as he had never cried in his life. There, in front of that smile, that look, that presence he thought he had lost forever. "You're back, my love. You're back," he said with a trembling voice. His eyes closed, holding her hand with both hands now. And Grace, although she didn't say a word, answered everything with that look, that almost invisible smile. Life, so fragile, hanging by a thread, was now there between them. Once again, Ethan looked at his mother as if he were still dreaming. His little eyes were shining with tears, and his whole body was trembling with emotion. The bed was high, full of wires and machines, but he didn't think twice. David helped him carefully, lifted his son in his arms slowly, and placed him next to Grace, as if he were returning a missing part of her. Ethan climbed up carefully, like someone who knows he is touching a miracle. He approached, lay down gently on her chest, snuggling close. His little head fit into the space between her shoulder and neck, just like he used to when he was smaller, when he still slept in her lap, listening to the stories Grace told him. The sound of the monitor continued. The room was silent. Then he spoke. "I heard you," he said softly. "You called me." Grace couldn't respond loudly, but her hand, the hand that David thought would never move again, rose slowly, trembling. She touched her son's face tenderly. Her fingers gently brushed his cheek, and then, in a weak, hoarse voice, she said, "Thank you for coming back." David covered his mouth with his hand, trying to hold back the tears that were welling up inside him. He watched the scene as if he were watching a piece of his soul being sewn back together. Ethan closed his eyes. A slight smile appeared on his face, even though he was still crying. There, on his mother's chest, he seemed to be at peace, as if the world outside no longer existed, as if everything he needed was right there. At that moment, time stood still. The hospital disappeared. The pain, the fears, the despair, everything fell silent. Only love remained. A love that came and went. A love that never gives up. Hours later, the ICU room was quieter. The machines continued to monitor Grace, but the sounds now seemed like part of a new song, one that spoke of miracles and hope. David was still by her side, sitting with his hand in hers while Ethan slept, curled up in a chair, exhausted. The doctor entered silently. He wasn't carrying a clipboard with papers and a serious face, but a gleam in his eyes that mixed surprise and respect. He stood next to the bed and looked at David carefully, like someone who knows he is about to say something that cannot be put into words. "Mr. David, we checked everything, the tests, the medical history, the current signs, and we have no explanation, at least not a medical one." David nodded, waiting. "The closest thing to this, we could say, is that Grace suffered from what we call neurological catalepsy. It's a rare syndrome, very rare, a type of nervous system collapse that causes the body to almost shut down completely. Vital signs drop to such low levels that it can be confused with clinical death. The heart slows down, breathing almost stops. The muscles freeze, but I saw all the tests. She had no life. I don't know if you believe in God, but this can only be a miracle." He paused, looking at Grace, who was now sleeping with a peaceful face. "In most cases, those who enter that state do not return." David swallowed hard, squeezed her hand tighter, but she came back. He said in a low voice, as if still trying to believe. The doctor nodded slowly. "She came back, and that's something not all the books can explain." They were silent for a moment. Only the sound of the machines filled the room, until David, with his eyes filled with tears, asked, "But why? Why her? Why did she come back?" The doctor looked him in the eyes, then looked at Ethan, who was sleeping hugging an old teddy bear that the nurses had gotten for him. Maybe because someone heard, and because she also wanted to hear back. He took a deep breath. Science is still trying to understand these things, but there are moments when it's not science. It's love, and love sometimes screams louder than death itself. David didn't answer. He just looked at Grace with more strength, like someone who understands that everything, Absolutely everything only makes sense because of how it feels. And in that moment, he knew. Some comebacks don't come from life, they come from the heart. That boy, said the doctor with a tone of respect, didn't give up. He heard something, felt something, and came. He called his mom in the purest way that exists, with love. Ethan looked at the two of them without understanding much, but with that sincere way of someone who only does what his heart tells him to do. She called me first, he said quietly, and I just listened. David looked at his son and swallowed hard. The doctor kept his eyes on them. Sometimes we don't understand what's happening, and we don't have to understand. There are things that can't be explained. They have to be felt. David couldn't hold back. The tears came back, soft and painful. He hugged Ethan, holding him as if it were the first time. And there, in that room full of machines and noise, the simplest answer was also the most powerful, because in the end, it wasn't medicine or luck. David couldn't take it anymore. When he saw that Ethan was asleep again, too tired to keep his eyes open, he got up from the couch and knelt beside Grace's bed, the same bed where he thought he had lost everything. He stayed there with his hands clenched on the sheet, his gaze down, breathing deeply. "I'm sorry," he said, almost in a whisper. "I'm sorry for signing those papers, for leaving you there alone, for thinking it was the end." Tears fell as he spoke. "I thought there was no hope left. I thought it wasn't worth fighting for anymore, and for a moment I accepted it. Forgive me for that, Grace. Forgive me for almost giving up on you." There was a deep silence. Only the VIP on the monitor marked the passing of time, and then, very slowly, Grace's hand moved so softly it seemed like the wind. She touched David's face. Her fragile fingers brushed his skin as if they wanted to wipe away the pain. Their eyes met, and with an almost invisible smile she said, "You didn't give up, you stayed." Those words pierced David like a hug, like a forgiveness that needed nothing more. He looked up, took her hand lovingly, and also looked at Ethan's little hand there beside him. He was silent for a moment, and then spoke firmly. "We're going to live together. Space. One day at a time." The voice came out, trembling, but full of truth. Grace squeezed his hand, weakly but firmly, and there, at the edge of that bed, with no big promises, no impossible plans, a new pact was born, a way to keep going, to start over, one day at a time, united in pain, in faith, and in the love that even death could not silence. In the hospital corridor, the murmur was constant. The nurses looked at each other in surprise. The doctors whispered among themselves. Even the cleaning staff commented from one floor to another. It was as if a secret was growing inside, a secret that no one could keep for long. "Did you hear?" asked a nurse in the elevator, her eyes wide open. "The lady in room 3 was going to be cremated, and she came back," replied her colleague, shaking his head in disbelief. She spoke, moved her eyes, and came back. "It's a miracle, isn't it?" The gossip spread like wildfire. "The woman who came back from the cremation," that's what they said, some in amazement, others with faith, and many with tears in their eyes. The story took over the conversations in the cafeterias, at the nurses' stations, in the offices. "I was there. I saw it," said an assistant, almost breathlessly. The husband screamed and banged on the glass. It was like a scene from a movie. They say it was her son who heard her first, who felt it. They say she said his name. Before anything else, in the boy's dreams. Ah, that's not science. That's God. Some tried to explain it with technical words. Others preferred to remain respectfully silent, as if they had just seen something sacred. Even those who never believed in anything were left with a different look on their faces when they heard the story. If this isn't a miracle, then what is it? The card with Grace's name was passed from hand to hand, but no one read it as they had before. It was no longer just a file. It was a living reminder that sometimes the impossible happens, that life can return when everything seems lost. And among so many tired faces and heavy shifts, that story lit something that had long been extinguished inside: hope. The gate opened slowly, as if it knew that this moment was different. David pushed with one hand, while holding Grace's body firmly with the other. Still fragile, but alive, more alive than ever. In his arms, she felt as light as a feather, but she carried the weight of everything they had been through. Ethan walked ahead with short, anxious steps. In his hands, he held a bouquet of simple flowers picked with the help of a neighbor. Daisies, wildflowers, and a slightly wilted rose in the center that he insisted on including, because it was the one that looked most like his mother. The sun shone gently on the sidewalk, and the neighbors peeked through their windows discreetly, with that look that mixes surprise and admiration. David stopped at the door of the house and looked into the living room as if he were seeing it for the first time. Everything was in its place, but everything was different because she was back. He carefully bent down and sat Grace in the wheelchair, still pale, still recovering, but with a small smile on her lips and her eyes shining with emotion. Ethan ran toward her and placed the flowers in his mother's lap very carefully, as if he were giving her a sacred gift. "They're for you, Mom," he said softly. Grace took the bouquet with both hands, her eyes filled with tears. Then she turned to look at David. He smiled, a tired smile, full of marks, but more sincere than ever. "Welcome back, my love." She didn't answer, just reached out her arm. David understood instantly, bent down, hugged his wife, and with a gentle effort, lifted her out of the chair. "Come inside in my arms, like on our wedding day," he said with a trembling voice, and entered with her in his arms slowly, crossing the door as if they were starting again, a story that almost didn't have an ending. Ethan followed behind, pushing the wheels of the wheelchair, smiling, and for the first time in days, the house breathed, as if it knew that all this was more than just a return. It was a miracle. The living room wall was plain, painted a light color with a few marks from the passage of time. But now, right in the center, a new drawing brought a color that no paint could give. Ethan, standing on a chair, stretched out his little arm very carefully. David held his waist, making sure he didn't fall, and there, with a piece of crooked tape, the boy stuck up his new drawing, 3 figures holding hands. He was in the middle with his hair standing on end, and a big smile. To his left was David, with a thick beard and big eyes. To his right was Grace in a yellow dress with a heart drawn on her chest. Above them was a blue sky, and in one corner, a star shining yellow with a golden line around it. Right there, all alone, but lighting up everything. "That star is my mom when she almost went to heaven," Ethan said softly, but he beamed so brightly that she came back home. David lowered his head and swallowed hard. Grace, sitting on the couch, smiled with her eyes full of tears. The drawing remained there high on the wall, as if saying, "We did it." Later, the 3 of them left the house slowly. The sky was clear. The wind was blowing gently. Ethan walked in the middle, holding his parents' hands tightly. The 3 of them walked in silence, but it was a beautiful silence. It was peace. They entered the hospital chapel together, the same place where almost everything ended, and also where everything began to change. Grace lit a candle with trembling hands. She watched the flame rise slowly, then closed her eyes. David was behind her, also with his eyes closed. Ethan stood in the middle, clutching their hands tightly. The 3 of them stood there, steady, complete, and there, in front of that soft light, not a word was spoken. David was sitting in the living room armchair with his cell phone resting on a stack of books. The light of the sunset came through the window, gently touching his face. The distant sound of Ethan playing in his room, and Grace in the kitchen, moving something on the stove. The house was finally alive again. He took a deep breath before pressing the record button. He stood there for a few seconds in silence, staring at the camera, his eyes still red, his voice broken, but there was firmness there, a certainty that only someone who has been through what he has been through can have. Sometimes it seems like everything is lost. He spoke slowly and calmly. The pain is intense. The world goes dark. You look around and see no way out, no meaning. He paused. He looked at the floor as if searching for words inside his chest. I thought I had lost everything. The woman of my life, our son, faith, hope, everything. His eyes filled with tears again. But then, love. Ah, love. He took a deep breath, and a slight smile escaped him. Love doesn't shout. It doesn't make noise, but it stays. It insists. It calls. And sometimes, when you no longer expect anything, love returns. He looked toward the kitchen where Grace was laughing softly at something. Then he turned his eyes back to the camera. If you are listening to this now and feel that there is no way out, I only ask one thing of you. Stay. Hold on. Wait a little longer. Because love can still surprise you. And now, tell me in the comments what you would have done in David's or little Ethan's place. Would you have believed that call? Would you have had the strength to keep going? Leave your opinion below. I read every message with an open heart. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the bell, okay? That way you'll get the next videos as soon as they come out. Now click on the video that's appearing on the screen. It's another real and very moving story that has already made many people cry and think differently about life.